Correlians Live Telethon. The team here would like to thank you for all of your support in assisting us in bringing a contingent of paladins to the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago, Illinois, August of this year. We are trying to raise $10,000 to assist with the basic needs of housing, food, and travel expenses. Here are some words from the members of the event team on why it is important that we reach that goal.
I'm Pam Kelly. I am a member of the Sacred Order of Paladins, and I am here to tell you about why are we doing a telethon and how you can help us. Well, let me show you. Let me show you what's in the future. This weekend, Friday, 5 p.m. on Eastern Time, all the way till the 7th of May, which is Sunday at 7. We'll be doing 50 hours of magic and community, lots of shows, lots of guests. But what is it all for? Well, I'd love to show you about it rather than just tell you about it. We are planning to go to Chicago, the Parliament of the World's Religions. It's happening this August, and there's going to be leaders from all sorts of faiths there, as well as leaders from both the Correlian tradition. Circle Sanctuary will be there, and it's the place to be. And it's a place for us to be part of the conversation. This year, it's going to be a call to conscience, defending freedom and human rights, something that's very important to the pagan community, and also part of why we're paladins. We want to defend people, we want to protect people, and we want to be there to show a positive part of what we do as pagans. So please help us. This is happening in August, and we're trying to do what we can to raise money. And our biggest part of the campaign is this weekend. It is the road to the Parliament. So like I said, we'll be around all weekend long with lots of entertainment and shows and ways for community. So you're invited to be part of that. But also don't forget to donate if you can. The best way to donate, there's two ways, is to go to correlians.live/donate. And here are chances for you just to give an amount. And you can give credit to one of our paladins here, or none, just give it to all of us. We don't get the money, but it makes us feel nice. You know, we don't have a competition going on yet, but who knows? But it'll be friendly, obviously. The other way to do it is givebutter.com, givebutter.com/C/Correlians Live. And here, not only can you donate, but you can get some more information on why we're doing this. Also, where you can watch this on Pagan World TV on Roku, Magic TV on YouTube, or streaming live on the web at Correlians.live. And you can share this. This is a good thing too. You can share this link with other people. Not only does it give you the opportunity to donate, but here's where we have the option. We're going to have plenty of items to bid upon, and you can start the bidding on Friday. It's going to be fun. There's all sorts of things. A 15-minute tarot reading with First Priest, Most Reverend Phoenix Coffin Williams. That's great. All these different readings here. Look at that chainmail pentacle wall hanging. Who would want that? I see a bidding war unrolling, unveiling, becoming a thing this weekend. A numerology chart. You know, I don't know if I should look at this right now. I can't bid yet, but we will be bidding all during the during the event. So please join us and please donate. We really would like to be at the Parliament here, manifesting vibes and support the paladins on our road to the Parliament. Thank you so much for listening and being part of this monumental effort and historical effort. So thank you. Blessings.
Hi, I'm Reverend Mary Hawk, and I am a member of the Sacred Order of the Paladins. Why are we going to the 2023 Parliament of World's Religions? Because representation matters. It's important that pagans be there to show that we are a growing tradition, that we are a viable religion, and we need to take our seat among other world religions.
From all of us here at the 2023 Correlians Live Telethon, we want to thank you again for your support. Please be sure to check out Divination Alley and get yourself a reading. Or check out our online auction that is overflowing with wonderful craft items, books, and services for sale. Remember, our goal is to raise $10,000, so please help us spread the word about the event, our cause, and be sure to stay tuned for more. So thank you all again, and may you all blessed be. Enjoy the telethon.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for watching and joining in and supporting the Correlians Road to the Parliament. My name is Reverend Phoenix Coffin-Williams. I am the first priest regent of the Correlian Nativish Church. And joining us today is Mr. Christopher Penczak of the Temple of Witchcraft. Super, extraordinary author.
Thank you.
And we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff. They told me it's about The Mighty Dead, though, the book that you wrote, The Mighty Dead.
Okay. I'll talk about whatever you want.
I'm going to talk about a bunch of stuff. So first off, what have you been up to, since the pandemic?
So my most recent obsession that started during the pandemic has become taking a course on sacred geometry that involves temple building. So I'm learning the measurements of how to create sacred space by arranging stones and geometries in the land. And that has been my obsession since the COVID kind of quarantine and timeout and everything like that. So I ended up joining a class that's about a 3-year program. And we host the in-person parts here at the temple, but the teachers are actually from France. And we're really developing the land here in the Temple of Witchcraft. We have 2 stone circles we've built since we started, and we're going to be doing little temple spaces and labyrinths and things like that. So all based in sacred geometry. So that's been my real obsession.
All right, that sounds so wonderful and fascinating. How did you come across sacred geometry?
Well, I've always been interested in sacred sites and stone circles and kind of gather up whatever books or whatever videos I can find about it. And then during the pandemic, I ended up coming across, I don't know if it was their Instagram or their Facebook, but a group of teachers that under the business named Energetic Geometry. And it's a couple that lives in France, and they've basically dissected the geometry and the architecture of cathedrals and Roman temples and Greek temples and Egyptian temples. And they've looked into some Hindu and Buddhist stuff and some indigenous stuff, and have found a pattern under it. And they studied with various people that have been involved in particularly the cathedral traditions. And they've created these courses about it. So during the pandemic, they had some online courses. I took the online courses, and as things started to come back again, they started doing in-person stuff. And I was like, hey, would you like to host? Like, you have different hosts around, parts of the world. They teach in Spain and France and Sweden and all over South America. So I said, when's your next American class? And they didn't have anything scheduled. So I sort of offered myself as the host. So the Temple of Witchcraft is now hosting it.
All right, now, way to make it manifest.
Exactly.
Good for it.
Yeah.
Let's see, what is it that you most enjoy about being the head of a tradition of witchcraft?
Wow. Well, I love that I've had the opportunity to create the thing that I wished I had. I think whether it's the books that I've written or the tradition or the organization, I'm always looking to fill the gap of what wasn't around when I needed it. So that way it'll be around for when other people need it. So I think that's the part that I like the most about the process. But I do like both the kind of twin aspects of the creativity and the magic and the community aspect of it, to be able to see it. You can kind of write in a vacuum and put out books and hope people use them, and they usually do, but you don't have that same engagement with it. So the way I like to write and the way I like to teach is something gets developed in a small group first. So I have people who are initiates that I know what they're doing, and I can be like, hey, here's this idea, this ritual, this meditation, get their feedback, and then do a little bit broader group and get their feedback and kind of adapt things to make sure it makes sense to everybody, and then kind of bring it to the public and bring it to a larger body of people. And then I feel like whatever I'm teaching is very refined at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So, very rarely do I write something or teach something and just kind of put it out into the universe without testing it. I believe you really should kind of test and make sure everything works before you share it with the public.
Understood. Heard on that. Yeah. Do you have a specific type of magical practice or technique that is so uniquely lovable to you that you're willing to share?
Sure. Well, I think something that's inherent in my practice and my life and the temple, over the years, before we created the temple as an organization legally, I sort of received, I guess is the best way to think of it, through meditation, a teaching on something we call the three rays of witchcraft. And it sort of brings together my interest in theosophy and my interest in ceremonial hermeticism and my interest in witchcraft into one kind of system. And that's actually become the basis of the temple. So a lot of our work is based on the ideas of love, will, and wisdom as the three rays. And part of our system is that, so it's not just me as the head of it, but my two partners and I were the founders of the temple, and we rotate through those three roles every year. So this year, currently, usually at the spring equinox, we switch. So this year, I've taken the blue ray, and the blue ray is about love and trust and the fairy faith and the lands and everything. And so that idea of the uniqueness of kind of changing your role every year so you don't get stagnant and stuck is a big part of my personal practice and is a big part of how I frame things. So each of the rays has a spiritual group of entities you work with, like the red ray is angels and archangels, the blue ray is the fairy races, the yellow ray is the ancestors. And so while you don't leave your contacts year after year, you kind of see who's up front. And so this year up front for me is the fairies and the land spirits and the elementals. So I love that aspect of it because it always keeps things fresh and brings something new to it.
Wonderful. That was such a great answer.
Thank you.
Now, I have a question
Sure.
that is based on a ritual that I went to that was done by someone who's studying the Temple of Witchcraft. And they cast a circle using something called underworld orientation.
All right. Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Sure, absolutely. It is probably our, I won't say our most controversial point, but it is the one that brings the most questions. So most people, when they come to Western occultism, Wicca, witchcraft, what most of us are familiar with, if you're using the elements in the four directions, most of us learned, although I didn't learn it this way, but most of us learned earth in the north, air in the east, fire in the south, and water in the west. And that's probably the most common. That was popularized through the Golden Dawn. That was popularized through Gardnerian Alexandrian Wicca. And there's some debates on actually how old that is, because it seems to, if he didn't start it, it definitely was cemented with the work of Elphius Levi. But before that, like in the grimoire traditions and the lesser and greater keys of Solomon, there's hints that perhaps that was not the way it was. So there's a couple lines that you can be like, oh, was fire someplace different? But when I first started studying, I was studying with Laurie Cabot, and in the Cabot tradition, they put fire in the east and air in the south. And that's always been the big contention. And Laurie sometimes changes her reasons for why when somebody asks her what that's about. So for me, I'm always about, the experience of it and then asking the spirits and diving into it to try to get my own answers for it. And so through both the research and through talking with the spirits, it became much clearer that if you study elemental theory, every element has two qualities to it. Every element is either warm or cold, and every element is either wet or dry. And if you plot those out on a circle, it navigates or transforms. You have common qualities if you put fire and water in opposition, and if you put air and earth in opposition. You find that in Greek medicine, you find that in alchemy. They don't always put it to the directions because they're not always casting circle, but that's the alchemical mandala of it. So if you have something that's warm and dry like fire, and you cool it down to ash, you get cold and dry, that's earth, because the salts and the minerals, and you can kind of move around the circle, transforming things alchemically. And then as the temple developed, we have a lot of technique, and we ask people to do things in the techniques, at least the first few times, to experience what they're about, sort of like learning an art technique or a music technique. But then after that, we don't have a lot of dogma. So after you've learned the experience in your own private practice, if you want to do something different. So over the years, we've experimented with things and discovered different priests and priestesses would orient the elements differently. And 3 or 4, and sometimes more, but 3 or 4 orientations sort of come out as dominant. And as we started to do more shamanic work and we started to do other spirit work, we realized certain of the orientations were more conducive to other events. So the traditional way most people learn, with air in the east and fire in the south, we consider very middle world in terms of shamanic cosmology, because most people associate them with the seasons, although the Greeks had different elemental associations with the seasons, but they're in the Mediterranean. I'm here in New England, so the Golden Dawn ones make sense. So the idea of air is spring, fire is summer, water is fall, and winter is earth. So when we're doing more deeper underworld, ancestral, dark goddess, dark fairy type stuff, We want that catalytic transformation. We want that opposing confrontation of fire and water opposing each other and earth and air opposing each other. So when we do that type of work, we use an alchemical, or it's sometimes called alchemical orientation, or the underworld orientation, because it creates a great change. But for some people, it's very uncomfortable. So sometimes I've done those circles and like, oh, it's not what I'm used to. It's a little too intense, but it's purposely intense because the purpose is to trigger change. And then because of those two things, we started exploring with, well, what is the upper world orientation? And so two have sort of come out over the time, and I favor one over the other these days, but both make sense. So in, a lot of traditional lore, there's the idea of the royal stars or the watcher stars, and they come out per season, and they're associated with the heliacal rising of the fixed signs for the most part. So it's Aldebaran in Taurus in the springtime. It's Regulus for Leo in the summertime. It's Antares for Scorpio in the fall. And although it's not technically an Aquarius, it's sort of between Aquarius and Pisces, Fomalhaut in between Pisces and Aquarius in the wintertime. And so because of those seasons, we tend to put them around the circle that way. So Aldebaran is in the east, and Regulus is in the south, and Antares is in the west, and Fomalhaut's in the north. And so when we do it that way, we think, so then that puts Taurus, Earth in the east, fire, Leo in the south, water, Scorpio in the west, and then air, Aquarius in the north, which messes some people up. And I used that for a long time. And then it was really pointed out, and something we should have thought of, but it didn't really come across it because that's the way I learned the order of the stars. If you actually look at the heavens, if you actually look at an astrology chart, it's not that way. It's actually flipped because the zodiac goes backwards. So technically, it would be Earth in the east, air in the south, water in the west, and fire in the north, which really freaks people out. But both of those are oriented in mythologies of the stars, so we use those for the overworld. And then recently, the energetic geometry folks that are teaching the temple building that we're doing, they have even a different orientation of the elements. So we're kind of playing around with that in their system just to experience that. So we don't have any hard dogma of the elements have to be a particular place. But when people take classes, if they do it a different way, we're always going to follow that up with, well, why? What does that mean to you? What was the thought process or the feeling process behind it? But when we're in group and community, it's usually one of those orientations.
Thank you so much for explaining that.
You're welcome. I know that was a little heavy on the star lore, but hopefully it was okay.
Oh, and I told Christine, I was like, I'm gonna ask about it. So thank you so much for doing that. And she did mention like middle world, like overworld orientation, but she hasn't done any rituals that like utilize that yet.
Yeah.
But when we do Osiris Hades and Persephone, that's usually what she goes to for that circle.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Let's see. How old is the Temple of Witchcraft right now?
Well, it depends on how you define it. So as a legal organization, we incorporated in 2009. So, in the grander scheme of things, not that old. As a tradition, as the first classes came out and as the system that we're using, I often say the temple started as a system and based in classes, sort of became an informal community. Then the informal community decided to become a formal community and a tradition and a legal organization. So we've actually been around through the system since 1997 was when the first classes came out. But we didn't incorporate till about 2009. We were talking about it around 2007, but we didn't actually get the legal stuff together till 2009.
And the overall vision for where you are right now as a leader, as a church, as a tradition, that vision, how did that first come to you?
I would say by accident, which seems kind of funny, but I didn't have grand plans for this. When I got involved, just even before I started teaching magic and witchcraft, I felt it was a very personal thing. I was happy to learn, and I wanted to be a rock star. My degree's in music. I was in the music industry at the time. And then when that all sort of folded up on me, I couldn't get a job answering phones in an office. And I was like, am I going to move to LA? Am I going to move to New York? All that type of stuff. And then I ended up just putting up a flyer for meditation classes, and it was full. And then I got really clearly and a lot of spiritual guidance about teaching witchcraft, and I put up a flyer for witchcraft classes, and that was full. And suddenly I found myself, sort of eking out a living of meditation and teaching witchcraft and things like that. But I was only teaching because my teachers at that time were very private, and they weren't taking public students and things like that. And I taught what I learned and kind of left it at that. And people were always like, well, what's next? Well, what's next? Like, what else can you share with me? And that's what evolved into the temple system and the things that are different from maybe other systems that are out there. But I had no grand design of it. So I just taught for years and years and years. And then my little note stack that I gave out people kind of get larger and larger. And finally someone said, you should really write a book about this. And I had put out my first 2 books, and decided to, write a book on this. And I had all these student experiences and stories, so I could kind of incorporate those. And I did. And then my idea was just to kind of share the books with people. And then as the books were out, people were like, well, I'd like to teach this. I'd like to learn this with you. Are you going to be in my area to teach? So I started teaching weekend intensives and traveling on tours and doing things. And then I realized you can't really do this all in a weekend. So I started doing apprenticeships, and the apprenticeships rolled into year-long classes. And then the community local to me and the community through the year-long classes online and through correspondence stuff. At one point, I was literally doing just letters to people. People would write in their letters, and I'd mail them back a letter, which is crazy to look back on now. But the idea that they were looking for more community, and we had a couple hiccups, like a woman who completed the classes was it might have been a pagan pride or something like that, but was talking to other folks, and people can be really hungry for identity, which is not something that was really a focus for me. But in retrospect, I realized, like, for me, witch was the identity, but I wasn't super attached to any of the traditions I studied in.
Mhm.
And someone said at a larger community that they were a Penzakian witch of the Cabot lineage.
Oh,
And that was not words I had ever used. So someone who was in that group, who was a friend of mine, came back and said, hey, do you know so-and-so saying this? Are you cool with this? Because that doesn't seem like you. And I was like, oh, no, I never said that. So I'd have a conversation with the person, but it helped me realize people were looking for more cohesion in community, more identity in community, ways to kind of connect. And they felt a little left out because other people could say, I'm Gardnerian, I'm Alexandrian, I'm this, I'm that. And they didn't know what to call themselves. So I felt I didn't want it to be named after me. It wasn't really about me. So I have great respect for the traditions that are named after their founders, but it's not my thing. So for me, it was all based on this practice of sacred space in a temple. So we just called it the temple tradition. And then some years of that and doing larger public rituals and group work and things like that, some of us decided, should we formalize this? And is there a way that we can take it deeper? And for me, the main impetus was most of the places that I studied in and the people I studied with and the places that were sacred covensteads and libraries and basically community centers in a very informal way, all are gone now. Because
mhm.
either the person who owned the house sold it or died, or the family took over, or the coven exploded, because the covens explode every so often, and so all these things for a land-based tradition that witchcraft can be, we didn't have any land. We didn't have any sacred spaces. We're always trying to figure out, can I meet in this park, or am I gonna be in this person's backyard, which is great, and a great first step, but I would like to go back to the same place in 30 years and be like, oh, there's power here because people have been doing magic this whole time. And even though I was in a long-standing community in Salem, Massachusetts, other than the public parks, we didn't really have that. So I wanted to create something that would outlast any one generation. So that was sort of my mission of it. We're not coven-based. I think covens can be beautiful when they go well, but when they don't go well, they're not so beautiful. And I think a lot of people can serve and can be ministers, but might not necessarily be great ritualists, might not necessarily be great teachers, might not necessarily be great group leaders. And so what are other ways we could serve? So, we created a program where there's different ministries that are opportunities for people to serve. You can study solitary, you can study in groups. We created a lot of different options for people in their experiences of it, but we weren't trying to recreate the coven dynamic. So if someone wants a coven, people can independently be in covens, but there are no official hierarchical covens in the temple. And that was a big part of my vision. And then a lot of it is we wanted to sort of give a different offering to the duality of high priest, high priestess. It's a
Mhm.
tradition started by 3 queer men who are in a polyamorous relationship, but we also didn't want it to focus on queerness, even though queerness is welcome. It's one facet out of many. So we created the roles of the 3 founders and the 3 rays, and some of our magical groups, which are not covens, but usually come together for a specific purpose, have some gendered roles of priest and priestesses and have some non-gendered roles, and finding ways where everybody could serve in capacities that suited them.
Mm, Hmm.
So while we have high priest and high priestesses, it's not, our magic is not based on the partnership of the polarity of gender, although it can be if that's a part of that person's expression.
Hmm. Understood. Understood. That sounds like a real dynamic like approach to clergyhood. And clergyhood is my gender neutral term for priest or priestess or what have you. Um, Speaking of that, gender roles or what have you, I have a question that I have been dying to ask every like male leader, man leader, cis male leader, folks who identify like along that kind of line who are in witchcraft faiths.
Mhm.
What do you believe it means to be a strong man in a witchcraft faith or in a woman dominated or femme like central faith, like goddess worship?
Hmm. I don't think about that too much, I have to be honest with you. I identify, male, and also as a queer male. I think that gives me a specific perspective, although, in some ways I'm traditional queer male. So I don't tend to think of things as strong or weak or fitting particular stereotypes. I mean, I think of maleness for me as identifying with that and identifying with the gender assigned at birth, also relating to the maleness of God, in terms of the horn god, in terms of the sun god, in terms of the green man. I'm not, even though I'm a queer man in witchcraft, there's sometimes a push to be kind of anti-gender. And I'm definitely not anti-gender because I think there's a generative force in gender, even occult generation. So I think that's still an important aspect. I just think some traditions emphasize it too much. I think my relationship with the divine feminine, my relationship with the goddess is one of service. If it wasn't for the goddess, I wouldn't be doing this. It was a direct message. Hey, Christopher, you need to do this. And I was like, no, no, no. And then when I finally said yes, my life exploded in a good way, but it took me a while to see it. So I think for a lot of it is the service to the divine feminine as the creative force, as the generating force, is ultimately that which brings forth all of creation on that kind of cosmic level. And how do I minister to that? How do I serve that? How do I mediate that? So I think that's the strength, in priesthood for me. I think of priesthood sometimes as gender neutral because we separate it in our tradition, priesting from ministering. Priesting is serving the divine and the gods and the magic, and ministering is serving the people in the community for us. So I think of it as priesting or mediating for those higher forces in the ways that I'm called and accepted to do so. So I think that's where the strength comes from. But um, in the end, I tend to identify the most with being a strong or a capable witch more than a strong man in the witchcraft world. But I have a sort of I was raised by old Italians. Despite my last name being Polish, the family side that really kind of raised me was Italian, and it was all strong women. My mother, my dad was wonderful and super supportive, but he traveled a lot. So it was my mom, it was her mom, so my grandmother, my great aunt, and they all had they were super Catholic, but witchy things. They read tea leaves, and one was the curse breaker with the olive oil and the boiling spaghetti pot of water. So I saw that as a part of the feminine mysteries, is always a part of it, and I was privileged to be shown that. And when I was brought in by my teachers, all my early mentors were women, so I was very privileged to be shared with that because early 90s, you weren't going to take an 18-year-old kid and be like, hey, I want to show you all the mysteries. It was something I had to kind of prove myself and be accepted for it. And I feel very lucky that that happened. And a lot of aspect of that old worldness of my family background is very deferential, very, I don't know if chivalrous would be the right word, but there's an old fashionedness in my take to women, to the divine feminine. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I mean that in a super respectful way of like, even though, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's very strong feminist, and I always hold the door for her. And one time we had a conversation, she's like, just because you're the man, you don't have to hold the door for me. I'm like, oh no, I'd hold the door for anybody, but particularly I hold the door for you. But if you want to hold the door for me, I accept that too, because wherever your role is, but it's always that mutual respect. But my default always will be to help elders, to help the priestesses, to always be in that role. And to, even despite being a leader, take that step back. I'm always looking for where I can take that step back and let someone, male or female, step forward, but who's in service to the goddess. Not in deference, the god is still important too, but I think of the goddess as the great creatrix.
Understood. Thank you so much for indulging me in that question.
Absolutely. That was a good question.
Do you think that queerness is a traditional mark of calling for clergy?
I think queerness puts you between, and so I think clergy has to be between, because we have a lot of different roles and we have to fit in many different spaces and be sort of shapeshifters. So I think queerness allows you to have more fluidity for most people, not everybody, but for most people identify as queer. And I think there's a sensitivity that can come with that. I think also, as times change, the coming out process will be different. But I think still to this time, there was a time when I feared that although I never want it to be too hard, I appreciate the initiatory quality of queerness. And there was a time that I would hope that it would be so easy that maybe that initiation would not be so rough, but that seems to not be the world that we live in right now. So I think um, as long as there's an initiatory quality to queerness, there will be a call to magic, there'll be a call to spirituality, there'll be a call to clergy, whether it's witchcraft and paganism or something else. But I know a lot of people I would consider to be priests or clergy who would never describe themselves that way. But through their activism work, through their justice, through their social work skills, whether they're social workers or not, the people who are taking care of people if no one else to be taken care of, the people who are catching the people that fall between the cracks, particularly in queer community as well. But I know a lot of queer folk who are sensitive to those outside of the queer community who need help.
Mhm.
Um, Particularly, I know most of the queer folk I know are particularly aware of elders who are alone because we don't often have the same family dynamic where we think our kids are going to take care of us in our elderhood. So I know it as the age that I'm at and younger, I look at folks who do not have family to take care of them in their elderhood and how can I ease that burden and how can I reach out to them? And I think that's a part of clergy, that's a part of priesting. So yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. I don't think all queer folks are called to it, but I think it potentially opens the door because it is initiatory.
I really like that explanation for sure. Absolutely. And so when it comes to your book, The Mighty Dead, like abrupt segue, how long did it take you to write that?
That was a pretty quick one. That was a pretty quick one. It was based on a lot of personal practices. So I find the books that are most deeply invested in because I've been doing the rituals that are found in them for years. They're pretty easy to write up. I have the rituals written out already, so now I have to kind of create the teachings in between in a longer form.
Hmm.
But I don't know if I know how many months it took me to write, but it was probably under a year. And yeah, it was one of my books I'm the most excited about because I think for the longest time it was closest to my personal practice, and I've seen so many people go through real transformations with it. But it didn't take that long. I tend to either write really quickly or really slowly. So the book that I just finished and is hopefully coming back from the editor soon, I feel like took me 3 years, but it's a 2 volume set, so I can see why it could take me so long. But I would just do a little bit at a time because I felt like it was hard to just let it roll out. Like each part was very thoughtful, and each part I'd reflect on and I'd go back to, which is not my normal process. But I think each book's a little bit different.
Yeah, thank you for that. In the table of contents, like I noticed that there are bunches of different names for the Mighty Dead.
Yep.
But with all of like the different kind of names or like their classes, their orders, does this indicate that like the perception is that there's a whole world of Mighty Dead and its division and its like a class system or a caste system and their kings and lords or what have you? Or is it some other kind of like orientation? There's like these are all dead people, and depending on how they want to communicate with us, is what order they kind of drop from, or how does that organize?
That is a great question. So that's complex. So I'd say, in talking about the ancestors of the dead in general, um, I have different categories for them. As an occultist, I'm big into function.
Hmm.
So I'll put a label or a category to something because it helps me understand what is the function or what is the form to something. So in the broadest categorization, I would say there's the justified or enlightened or mighty dead and the beloved dead. So those who died in a traditional ancestral sense and still have work to do in the world and ancestral realm are in the beloved dead stage. And those who died with might, those who died in a state of enlightenment, those who'd be like the equivalent of the saints or bodhisattvas, that's what I mean when I say the mighty dead. Um,
Okay.
And I think the Mighty Dead, to answer your specific question, the way I learned it was very, a huge, although I identify as a witch first and foremost, I had a great sojourn, I guess I'll say, into the world of New Age metaphysics and theosophy, and light work and things like that. And although the paradigm is not my paradigm, it was really helpful to learn techniques. And at heart, as an occultist, I'm a part of the perennial tradition. So I believe there's a truth amongst all traditions and all religions mystically, not the orthodox stuff, but mystically. And so, I think there's essential things to the human experience, but I think we dress them up based on our language, our culture, our time period. So I think of the Mighty Dead, and this is just my personal opinion, I think of the Mighty Dead as a nexus of a collective consciousness, because I feel like if you reach that state of enlightenment, you've transcended dual consciousness, and maybe a Buddhist would say you're in non-dual consciousness or whatever words you want to use, but you've reached enlightenment, whatever that is to us. And I think in that union, you still present the face of who you were in a lifetime that person can relate to, because trying to relate to a collective consciousness of enlightened dead people is not super helpful for us. And I think if you think of that nexus point, like, and I often use this image with the gods too, but if you think of it as a great gem,
Mm-hmm.
there's all these different facets to it. I think each religion and each magical tradition peaks at that gem from a different viewpoint. So how we see them as witches is the mighty dead. Like when I go to the Great Sabbat, I am likely to see in the Sabbat, and I have seen in the Sabbat several times, Roman Catholic priests, Eastern Orthodox popes, nuns, Buddhists, indigenous shamans, folks I do not recognize, folks back to the Stone Age that don't seem to have a particular thing, people who are just naked, who have no particular designation of who or what they are, or people who are shadowed in cloak and I can't see their age or their race or their culture or anything. And I think they're all part of that collective consciousness. But for me, it's most helpful to think of them as sorcerers and witches. But if I was Catholic, it would be much more helpful for me to think of them as saints. Or if I was Buddhist, it's much more helpful for me to think of them as bodhisattvas. So I think we each have our own lens with that. But with that in mind, like teachings in the ceremonial traditions will say that there are different hierarchies,
Mm-hmm.
but their hierarchies are sort of either by function. Some of them will do specific things,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them do specific things on Earth, for lack of a better word for it, and some of them do specific things in the cosmos. So, like one that's been helpful for me to understand was in I guess it's more ceremonial teachings, more Hermetic Kabbalah, Golden Dawn style stuff. They're what they describe of and dated terminology, but it's what is passed down to us. So I've heard people change it. We're the lords of flame, the lords of form, the lords of mind, and the lords of humanity. And from that system, the lords of humanity are the ascended masters that we think of, the mighty dead. And these are the more cosmic masters operating in higher orders. I think there's also something to be said about different archetypal roles that the ancestors may play that do transcend cultures, but the idea of sovereigns or kings, the idea of an inner order priesthood, an inner order priestesshood, an inner order of kind of queens and monarchs, inner orders of warriors, inner orders of poets and seers. I think they take different shapes, and we sometimes think of them by mythic figures. Like I learned that Merlin wasn't a person, but was an order of being. And when you achieved Merlin consciousness, you were part of that order of being, but that was a very specific route of what we might call the mighty dead. Or if you read the old Taliesin poetry, he transcends time. If you look at the stories, Taliesin will say, I was here and I was there and I was at the flood and I was at these biblical stories and I was at all these pagan stories and I've been everywhere and I've seen the whole world. And so that shows that there's a spirit kind of moving through an order of people, and all those people are connected to that collective consciousness. Or Hermes Trismegistus, he's written all these books, which wasn't one person, but it was the spirit of Hermes and those who've achieved that hermetic consciousness coming through to teach those specific types of truth. So I think it's complex. So I think it is one collective consciousness, but I think we have multiple ways of seeing it. And I think depending on the function, like it's looking at a body. Am I looking at the body? Am I working with the liver? Am I working with the heart? Can I see the whole? Can I see the part that I need? and it's kind of separating in that way. So it's a little bit of a paradox.
Understood. Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
When it comes to the mighty dead and the beloved dead as like those kind of delineations, um, is there a way for someone who's like a beloved dead? Can they ascend, or do they have to reincarnate first and do some work and then like die in that place? Or how do you think that works?
These are the mysteries. I think anybody who tells you this is the way it absolutely is not truthful, or is very delusional. The idea that I think until you do it, you don't know. And I think at the same time, I think there's always exceptions to the rules. So even if you have some type of theology or teaching or dogma that says this is the way, I think there's always an exception to it. There are rituals that elevate ancestors that have passed to higher levels, and you find that in quite a few different traditions, from ancient Rome and Catholic saints to African traditional religions and hoodoo type folk stuff, and we also find that in some of the witchcraft traditions. I think sometimes the problem I have with that is it very clear that the person wants to be elevated? Or do you want them to be elevated? So I think it's good to do divination and spirit work with them. But if they want it, then sure. And I've known people who've supposedly gone through that. I think the traditional view is it's through the effort of your work, you craft the vessel or the body of light that allows your consciousness to join this collective, rather than kind of go back into the cycles or the wheels of reincarnation. But I'm always a stickler for breaking the rules. So like if there's a different way to do it, I hope a spirit finds it.
I love it.
Who am I to tell a spirit that it shouldn't find enlightenment that way? But I think some of them are helped by incarnate humans to elevate them. And I think that's where a lot of our ancestral reverence really helps elevate them, or at least if it doesn't bring them to that enlightened state, it gives them a stronger platform to reach it themselves. But I think some rituals can elevate them, but I think that takes a lot of work and a lot of energy. And I think most of the time it's from people's work. But I think some people we venerate as the mighty dead. This is the beautiful part of the teaching, I think, is that if this nexus of collective consciousness is outside of space and time. So one of the phenomenons you might experience if you go to the nexus of the mighty dead, so my image of it is the witch's Sabbath, you may sometimes find yourself in the witch's Sabbath. And sometimes people say, well, how egotistical that is that you think you're enlightened. Well, it's outside of space and time. So aren't we eventually all getting there at some point? So you can meet your future wiser self there, or anybody's wiser self there. And you don't know how many incarnations it's going to take. But I'd like to think all of us are eventually a part of the Sabbath. And if I can tap into the Sabbath beyond space and time, then I could work with anyone. So like we venerate some of the martyrs of the witchcraft trials as a type of mighty dead because they died in the name of witchcraft, and we'll honor them as a part of our ancestry work, even though we know they're not witches in the sense that we use the word witch. And some of them have shown up, some of the Salem witchcraft trials, because that's something near to my heart, learning magic in Salem, Massachusetts, have shown up in the mighty dead, even though I know they were Christian in their life. Or some of the witchcraft elders of our generation that have passed in the last 50 years, some of them who I've met, and I would deem by my conversations with them, as much as I love them, I don't know if they died in enlightenment, yet they're in that nexus of enlightened beings. Who am I to say they shouldn't be there just because I've observed their behavior, very human behavior. Human behavior doesn't necessarily constitute non-enlightened behavior. So I think that also helps too, to realize, what is the characteristics of enlightenment? I don't know. I know my biases and what I think would be enlightened, but we don't know that's true. So somebody could be really trickstery here. Somebody could actually be really awful at some point, and that moment of awfulness was necessary for a particular lesson or experience. I'm not condoning abuse or anything like that, but I think it's very hard to look at the arc of someone's life and say, yep, they were definitely enlightened, or nope, they definitely weren't. And I think it doesn't matter, because eventually we're all getting there. So if I see one of the witchcraft elders that have died in the last 20 years and they're in the conclave of the mighty dead, then I'm going to talk to them, see what they have to say, so they all eventually get there, I guess, including us.
I like that. I do like that. From that place or that perspective, what would you say is the purpose of physical incarnation?
Growth. I think in the end, although many different dimensions have their good qualities and difficult qualities, and I think change can happen in many different dimensions, I think this is the intersection of time and space. And I think you need both time and space to truly evolve and grow. So I think incarnation gives you opportunities to change, to transform, to initiate, to become enlightened that you probably can't get in other dimensions. Not to say you can't get other good things in other dimensions, but I think human lifetime is a particularly unique opportunity. So I think it's sometimes sad when people think, "Oh, I don't want to be here," or "It's not, this world's a terrible place," or anything. It has problems. Not saying that it doesn't, but I think on some level, almost like a Tibetan Buddhist, I believe the opportunity for human incarnation is a great opportunity. And I think if you can take it and experience all that you can, and it's just, I think from a pagan perspective, as tough as life can be, life is also beautiful and it's pleasurable and it's great to be in flesh and it's great to feel pleasure. It's great to feel, sometimes it can be great to feel pain, just to understand that juxtaposition. It can be great to
I'm
feel,
into.
yeah, and even just that, and sometimes it's emotional pain too. The idea of, as tough as that is to experience, that's part of the full spectrum of humanity. And as much as I don't like pain emotionally, I wouldn't want to negate it from my life, because also that's a respective. If I'm in deep grief because someone died, that's also a mark of how much I love them. And so you can't have that love without having that grief, even though if we're immortal and not attached on that level. I think that's part of the process and the flow of being human. And I think you got to embrace it all. And I think it's such a good thing. And I think it's such a wonderful opportunity on so many levels. It's just, it's great to be alive. And so I think it's good to experience all of it, the full spectrum.
I love it. I love it. So I got some questions when it comes to like honoring, venerating, participating with ancestors. And this might be in the book. You might have covered it in a bunch of stuff, but for me, it's kind of like a little chit chat when it comes to like a personal, like you just got the impression one of your relatives, ancestors would like something from you, would need something for you. Well, and they're not telling you specifically what it is, but they're like, hey, like we need some attention, ancestor altar, what have you. What would be like your go-to thing to establish the fact that you have heard that they're reaching out for you and you are now coming to do the priesting?
Yeah, I think talking, for me at the ancestor altar, it's talking as if they're there.
Mm-hmm.
Talking collectively to, hey, family. My ancestor altar is my family, Steve's family, and Adam's family all kind of together. So we're all talking together. I assume their families know me at this point. But this idea of acknowledging if there's been a request, if I need clarity, asking for clarity. I'm a big muscle tester, so I get my yes or no's through that. So I might ask a series of questions of like, are you looking for food? Yes or no? What type of food, and kind of go through some things: sweet, sour, salty. Are you looking for drink? Yes or no? Alcoholic or not? Yes or no? Are you looking for smoke? Yes or no? Like, is it non-physical? You're asking me for service? Yes or no? And kind of narrow down what it might be that they're looking for. I know other folks like to do more pendulums, or they might like to do tarot cards or things like that. But my clearest, surest answer is just kind of doing little muscle testings of yes or no, and trying to narrow down the area of need. And sometimes what they're really looking for is just attention. I mean, there's times I'm pretty diligent with ancestral stuff, although, like I said, with the 3 rays, I kind of cycle through it, in our family. So right now I'm attending the fairies, and one of my partners is attending the ancestor altar this year. But it doesn't mean I don't go there. And it doesn't mean, and we also have a public temple ancestral altar that is members of the community and the greater witchcraft community. And we have a personal ancestral altar that's our individual families. And we do tend both of them, but sometimes it's just the, hey, don't forget us, kind of put out a glass of water, put out our offerings, just kind of be present with us. Sometimes we can get mechanical about it and just be like making the offerings, we have stuff to do. And sometimes they just want you to be there, sit and be present and listen.
Excellent. Excellent. I love it. In your book, The Mighty Dead, you've got a bunch of spirits that you have written about, exercises, so on and so forth. I recognize Tituba. I want to say St. Christopher. Who else did I see in there that I noticed in there? Actually, let me look. Got it right here.
St. Cyprian's in there.
When I saw them, I was like so happy to see like all of these like diverse names from across like various traditions. It's like very kind of validating to see that like the power of the witch is working with spirits of the dead. Just kind of does go across like these religious or cultural boundaries that we impose on ourselves while we're alive.
Yep.
Almost kind of like hinting at that perhaps they don't necessarily see those same divisions once they leave this place.
I truly, deeply believe that. That's actually been the most controversial part of the book. Some people were upset with that, and felt like, you, meaning me, had no business speaking or writing about particular things. I'm mostly writing about either history and my experience, which I think I have a right to talk about history and my experience. But my personal view as an occultist is that this transcends time and space and is common to the human magical experience.
Mhm.
And I feel like if you're open to those things, spirits will knock on your door. I visit New Orleans a lot, and I've had profound experiences at the various three graves that people attribute to Marie Laveau, and different experiences at those graves. And I've been at ceremonies that have honored her from voodoo practitioners. And once you have that opening come through, then the contact keeps happening. And so I venerate. I have a statue of Marie Laveau on one of my altars. And and it was interesting. I was interviewed by a voodoo priestess on a internet type of show out there, and she's like, "Oh, well, we don't really see her in that way, but it's really interesting that you do." And it was a great dialogue for it. And it's just trying to put the occult phenomenon to whatever your paradigm is. So for my paradigm, a venerated ancestor that has power is part of the mighty dead. I recognize that their traditions might not use that term, but then, how do they perceive an angel? They might bring an angel into another system, and that's not how that was meant to or be used in that system, but I think it's still real.
Mhm.
I think it's always going for the real experiences and what's the living experience, because I think things change and grow, and you can't keep them in boxes, because I think none of these things are in flesh anymore, so you can't really point to them. I think they transcend a lot of our boxes and labels, and I think it's okay to work with them respectfully however they show up.
Gotcha. When it comes to the ones that you wrote about, and I don't know, like, to what degree you remember, like, all the details, but which of the spirits that you wrote about would be most likely to show up at a rager
A rager.
and ask for jungle juice?
I don't know if I have an answer for that one. I would say Aradia likes a good party.
Who would be most likely to show up and correct the Thanksgiving dinner recipe?
I don't know if I wrote about her in the book, but an ancestor we venerate a lot in the Temple of Witchcraft who would do that would probably be my mother. And we venerate her in the larger community because she hosted all the major Sabbats that eventually led to the formation of the temple. So she was all about the food and making sure people were fed right. So yeah, I can see her doing that.
Heard on that. Let's see. Which spirit would be most likely to hijack consciousness at a graduation? With permission, of course.
With permission. Wow, you're stumping me with these. I'm not sure. I'm not sure on that one. Yeah, none are really striking out for that one. I'm sorry to say.
No. All right. Let's see.
Who do you think would be the best one to, come for graduation? Whether it's
to a graduation party. Let's see. Let's see. On this. Nope.
I mean, I don't know if he was in the book, but I'd say, Aleister Crowley might be in that realm, wanting a little bit of attention.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm not seeing anyone who that I would peg in that way either.
Yes, it's not just me you stumped.
No. What do you think Cassandra would show up to do? Like, just at random, just like, hey.
I think she'd show up to the party and, probably have lots of things to say, but
if Adam and Eve were to show up to a party, what do you think would happen immediately after they showed up?
Well, if it was one of my parties, they'd probably be, curious of, why the biblical figures are showing up at the witches' party. But be like, all are welcome. All are welcome.
So the reason why I ask about that is because I'm super curious to know what other magical people think about specifically the Aradia lineage, Roman dominionism, and the kind of syncretism that happened between some of the characters, like Cain and as Tubal Cain or what have you, and that intermingling that happened as a result of such behavior in the world.
Well, I find both that fascinating and the same type of intermingling in like the Gnostic Luciferian tradcraft stuff. I find all of that really fascinating. I love the Eradia text for the inspiration, but at the same time, there's parts of it that really leave me cold.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the parts that became the Charge of the Goddess, and I love as an occultist, I love the Diana as the Crescent Crown Moon Queen, and I do sort of like the titillation of the Lucifer, but in many ways, the Diana of Aradia is more of Hecate, and the Lucifer is more of Apollo. But I like the words that they use in some of the simple stories, and it gives a little folklore, but also, when you give it to a new student, it's kind of scary in some parts of it. I do so I'm a big believer in greater stories, I guess, to answer your question. A lot of pagans try to pretend that Christianity didn't happen. And while I understand the appeal of that, I don't think it's a good strategy or real or helpful, because it happened. So I think if there are things about the institutional views that the kind of Christian Abrahamic paradigm have instituted across a large segment of the world, I think pretending those are not there are not going to transmute them in ways that we think are healthy. And I'm not trying to disrespect other folks' religions, but I think there's some pretty strong paradigms of patriarchy and not being sex positive and things like that, and prejudicial and judgmental, and all that can be baked into a lot of the interpretations of that. So when I look at those stories, I think it's important for witches in telling modern witchcraft stories to acknowledge where those are and reinterpret them for ourselves. So I do find the Eradia stuff interesting for that, not always helpful. I do find the Gnostic Luciferian stuff interesting for that, but again, not always helpful. Although there was a little time I was sort of enchanted with it, thinking, is this the way to go? But I think I'm too old world and pre-Christian at heart. But I think it's good to acknowledge those things. So how do we weave those stories? So like, I don't not talk about the Garden of Eden, but I then also make the cultural comparisons. Like, what was the Garden of Eden? What were other traditions of paradise? What was in the Egyptian traditions, the Zep Tepi, the time before when the gods and man and everything was in harmony. In the Temple of Witchcraft, we call it the Garden of the Gods. And I think the idea of return and reunion to paradise is a good mythic thing to work with. But at the same time, I don't necessarily think that ignoring it all is bad. So I love that Aradia uses Cain and Abel and some Christian motif, because I think you got to recognize what's there.
Thank you so much for commenting and reflecting on that. We are at the 50-minute mark, so that means we're going to pause for our break. But when we come back, we will continue our conversation.
You're watching the 2023 Correlians Live Telethon. The team here would like to thank you for all of your support in assisting us in bringing a contingent of paladins to the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago, Illinois, August of this year. We are trying to raise $10,000 to assist with the basic needs of housing, food, and travel expenses. Here are some words from the members of the event team on why it is important that we reach that goal.
I'm Sir Brian John Ellicott, member of the Sacred Order of Paladins, and I want to thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about the Road to Parliament 2023 Correlians Live Telethon. 50 hours of magic and community. We are here to ask for your help as we send a contingent to Parliament of World Religions in Chicago, Illinois, this August in 2023. We're going to give voice to you, to our community, during these next 50-plus hours to help raise our goal of $10,000 so that we can supply housing and food for the Correlian Nativist tradition members who are going to Parliament this year. And we humbly ask that you continue to donate and bid on our auction, get tarot readings and other divinational readings from our readers over in Divination Alley. And I again want to thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you about the Paladins and why our telethon participation, your telethon participation, is vitally important to our participation in Parliament in Chicago this August. Our attendance is vitally important. Now more than ever, we see the need for our freedoms and human rights to be defended and preserved. And as pagans, we deserve a seat at the table for those conversations. And the best way you can do to help us is to donate, bid on auction items, and get divination readings. I am offering readings this weekend over in Divination Alley. The link is below. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.
One of the best things about Parliament is one of the best things that we need in our society, which is unity, compassion, and fellowship, which is something I'm extremely looking forward to. And I hope that this will be inspiration for the future and helping us to be more as one in a community. So join us, continue to join us. Thank you for sharing and liking our posts, and please continue to sponsor us.
Hi, I'm Reverend Mary Hawk, and I am a member of the Sacred Order of the Paladins. Why are we going to the 2023 Parliament of World's Religions? Because representation matters. It's important that pagans be there to show that we are a growing tradition, that we are a viable religion, and we need to take our seat among other world religions.
Hello, everybody. I am Reverend Sir Richard Donahue, also known as Cloud the Pagan Rapper, and I am a member of the Order of Paladins. Now, to help us send a contingent to the Parliament of World's Religions, to me, means one thing: community. It's the idea of coming together with multiple faiths for common goals. And it is paramount for the pagan community to have a seat at that table. And I, for one, am very, very proud that we are afforded this opportunity to do so. But to do that, we do need your help. We're trying to raise $10,000 so that we can feed and house the contingency of paladins that will be going to the Parliament. And it's through your help that we're going to be able to get there and represent the community in the best possible way that we can. So please, smash that donate button, all right? Smash that donate button. You can go to Correlians.live to donate. And I want to thank you guys for taking part in the telethon, okay? Check out our auction. Get yourself a reading from Divination Alley. Do all of the things that we have provided for you throughout these 3 days, and let us come together in community and achieve our goal and allow us paladins to go and represent us at Parliament. Thank you very much. May you all blessed be. From all of us here at the 2023 Correlians Live Telethon, we want to thank you again for your support. Please be sure to check out Divination Alley and get yourself a reading, or check out our online auction that is overflowing with wonderful craft items, books, and services for sale. Remember, our goal is to raise $10,000, so please help us spread the word about the event, our cause, and be sure to stay tuned for more. So thank you all again, and may you all blessed be. Enjoy the telethon.
All right, and we are back with our special guest, Christopher Penczak, and we are on the road to Parliament. So thank you for tuning back in for the rest of this program. Before we left for the break, we were talking about intermingling with biblical figures in witchcraft and, ways to interpret witch stories that include the incidents of Christianity that we've all been put through. Let's see. Was there anything else about that you wanted to say before we had to cut to the break?
Well, I will say that I'm a great lover of heretical saints. So although I'm not a big saint fan in general, I know that's popular in witchcraft and magic today too. I like the ones that the church doesn't like. So,
Hmm.
and maybe because of my namesake, but I have a great love of Saint Christopher because now they're like, oh, he's not really quite a saint. So kind of bringing that back can be fun. And I just like those figures that we have to kind of ask: did they exist? Did they not exist? I like Saint Cyprian and the sorceress nature. That's really great. So it's who can we see the magic and the witchcraft in, even though they might have been canonized and they might have been embraced by the church. So I always find those kind of interesting.
Yes. And so, what do you think about the idea that saints in general are, gods that couldn't be defeated during conquest?
I think some are. I don't think all are, but I think some of the particularly Celtic folks, I think a lot of folk saints were probably regional deities or regional heroes that couldn't beat them, so had to join them and reshape their story. And that's sort of what I'm talking about. Like, I think modern witches today have to take narratives and respectfully, but still reshape them to our worldview of, well, what did that mean for us? How did we process that? So, I look at the whole arc of history, and sometimes when we teach a mythic history of witchcraft, and I think it's always good to recognize a hard part our community has gone through, I think, in the last 30 years or so, is that separation of what's academic history sort of neutering some of our magical history. Like, when I got into witchcraft, it's going to be maybe a controversial statement, but here we go. When I got into witchcraft, it was still the mythos of this is an ancient cult that stretches back to the Stone Age. And then we had academia say, nope, that's not quite right. And I think both of those views are important, but I think people forgot there was a mythic history to the idea that you were entering into an ancient lineage of priesthood and an ancient lineage of magic, and you're assuming that mantle and that responsibility and belonging to something in a greater arc of history. And so I think when that mythology was sort of dispelled, people really either got upset by it, or as people started to accept that, we're a modern religion and, Wicca traces back to the 1950s, and we can, debate on whether Gardner created it or not, but this idea that the modern root of it is fairly modern. And we can't trace it back to the Stone Age. And when we look at the pieces of the Book of Shadows from that time, it draws from the grimoires, and it draws from this, and it draws from a little Aleister Crowley, and it draws from a little Kipling, and all very modern influences. I think it diminished the mythic archetype that a lot of people experienced initiation. Imagine if you decided to become Christian and someone said, there's this great guy who, went around doing miracles and was put on a cross and resurrected, and this is what it meant. But oh, by the way, he might not be real. And by the way, the historians can't prove that this happened. And when we look at these different stories, they might not be like, the magic is sort of robbed of what is it that what is the mythic history I'm coming into. So when I teach, I think it's really important to say at times, okay, this is the academic history, and we need to acknowledge that. And then this is the mythic history to understand our story, to understand how we enter into the story, to understand what it means. Because academia might give you the facts and figures, but they won't always give you the deep spiritual meaning. And the deep spiritual meaning sometimes glosses over the facts and figures. So I think you have to hold those two truths. And I struggle with that a lot. And as I started studying, particularly Tibetan Buddhism, it just blew me away that, and I was reading something that Dalai Lama was writing, and he talked about how, on one hand, the mythology of Tibet is that Buddhism has always been there, and they were founded by a mythical being that was Buddhist and has been guiding their nation, from this whole time. And I don't mean mythical in the sense not real, but otherworldly being. And then at the same time, they can trace where Buddhism left India, and through our modern understanding of what Buddhism is, came into Tibet and who first converted and what happened. And they can hold those two truths and not think one displaces the other. They just know when they're talking about academic history, it's this. And when they're talking about the spirit of Buddhism, it's that. And I think witches have to learn how to do that better. So I try to emphasize that.
How would they start to do that?
I think you have to be able to tell stories in initiations, in teachings that tap into that primeval, what is our purpose? I think even going back to the Aradia story, whether you like it or not, it frames that context of what was, what is, and where things could be. And it doesn't ignore that big gap of Christianity to it, so it kind of interweaves those stories. I think we're challenged right now to be writing and rewriting our histories and a mythic narrative to say, well, what does this mean? Where did it come from? For me, a lot of the history I teach to my students is very astrologically based.
Mhm.
So we'll talk about the trigons of Jupiter and Saturn and the elements that come up. We'll talk about the great ages, of the precession of the equinoxes, and we're leaving the age of Pisces and going into the age of Aquarius, but nobody knows when. And we'll talk about the discovery of the outer planets and how they shifted history, because it starts to put things that are familiar for people in their mythic resonance. It doesn't mean you change facts and figures. It doesn't mean you say something happened that didn't happen. But it frames the narrative in our spiritual truths, in our esoteric truths. And then you start to understand, oh, I'm a part of something that has been going on for thousands of years, even if it's an indirect link. I think wherever people were sitting in a circle around a fire, dancing, chanting, calling to the four directions, calling to the sky, calling to the earth, adoring the spirit of the moon, that was some type of witchcraft. That's some type of spiritual ancestor, even if they did not use that term, whether we think of them as pagan, whether we think of them as forms of indigenous traditions. I think there's a link and a root to what I do today, because I think those basic patterns are kept. We're still gathering in a circle. We're still under the sky for the most part. We're still, adoring the spirit of the moon. We still have kind of basic concepts of the directions, even if you don't have the four elements, or even if it's not the goddess, or even if it's not a silver cup and a blade. There's still key elements that tie us back to the most ancient of ancestors. And I think it's important to get into that current, to get into that groove, to realize you're a part of something bigger, because I think it conveys both a sense of power, but also responsibility.
Heard on that.
Yeah.
What role do you think the mighty dead and the beloved dead can play to help facilitate this?
Well, I think they're our link to the past, beyond space and time. And I think truly, and both, but particularly the mighty dead, often, if you can get clear contact with them, convey teachings that might have been lost, or can convey older teachings that you can bring into a modern context. All the weird stuff I teach, and one of the strange critiques I've gotten from people is like, well, this doesn't show up in any other book. How dare you teach this? And my whole point was, well, something has to show up for the first time. So for me, it's very much, I get spirit contact and I go through that process of testing it. So I share it with some people. Sometimes it doesn't work for anybody but me, so I don't share it. But if it works for a group of people, then share it with a larger group of people. I get feedback, I get context, and then I feel comfortable sharing the teaching. But I think that's how we progress our techniques, and we progress our rituals, and we progress our mythologies, is we have to listen to the spirits and work in cooperation with them. So I think there's vast bodies of knowledge. A great mentor of mine, Raven Gramasi, would say, we don't really create anything new, we just remember something. And whether we're remembering it from the spirit world, or we're remembering it from history, or we're being told a memory from a spirit, I think it helps progress things. I think we have to reshape things for our age and for our time and for our culture. But I think the basic patterns are fundamental. And it's just bringing that artistically into the new world. I think the spirits help us with that. So a lot of the teachings I think about that I didn't learn from my teachers, I learned from the spirits. And sometimes they were really clear, and sometimes there were a trail of breadcrumbs, and I had to figure it out for myself. But they all led to things that were helpful for me, even if some of those rare teachings I never share with anybody else because they didn't appear to be helpful for anybody but me. That was a teaching for me. And I think you can get teachings for you from the mighty dead, and you can get teachings for you and your coven from the mighty dead. You can get teachings for you and your coven and the world from the mighty dead. But you just have to get clear on the communication.
Excellent. And when it comes to the social climate that we're currently experiencing, do you think it would be important to kind of get the mighty dead to weigh in on what we're going through as a species? Because we're struggling. We could use some help.
Yep. I think the spirits need to be asked, and I don't think they necessarily have easy answers for us, because it's also to realize in their human lifetimes, they were in different ages. I believe that global consciousness evolves through the precession of the equinoxes and the unfolding of astrology. So I think even though we return, and I think there's things common to the human condition, each age is a little bit different. And it is sort of our job to figure out how to navigate this. I think like a wise teacher, they can give advice. I think like a wise mentor, they can point you in the right direction. But I don't think it's their job to control that arc. Although some theosophists and things would disagree with that. Like in early theosophy, there was something that freaks us out today, but they used to refer to it as the Great Plan. And it wasn't a human plan, but it was the idea that the ascended masters were guiding history. And sometimes you'd read things from that era of like the late 1800s, early 1900s of like, everything's unfolding as the way the masters want it to, and the plan on earth is being fulfilled, even if you can't see it. And that's helpful and not, because I think sometimes then people think, oh, I don't have to do anything because the masters are going to unfold it. I don't think the masters are unfolding it. I think they're part of the collective consciousness of the planet. So I think they're participating in it, and I think they can guide it. And I think it's an interesting take on the mighty dead. So one of the teachings is the belief that the spirits that the theosophists called the masters or the Mahatmas, and the spirits the Golden Dawn called the secret chiefs, were the same group of spirits sort of hedging their bets. And so they're like, let's get this more kind of new agey foundation going, and let's get this ceremonial foundation going and see what's going to help humanity the most through this process. And I'm sure they're the same spirits that are the bodhisattvas and the Catholic saints and things like that. But they seeded in the late 1800s, early 1900s, two really strong esoteric movements that have flourished and had its problems, too, as time has gone on. But I don't think they can make anything happen that we don't participate in, and I don't think they are necessarily in control of it. I think that they can guide the process with our cooperation, and we can cooperate with them for greater wisdom. But I think we have to be a part of it.
Understood. And when it comes to the present moment in the future, what do you think is like the biggest challenge that's facing like a global pagan, Wiccan, magical community?
Well, I think not just the pagan, Wiccan, magical community, but I think the whole world is struggling with the paradox of Aquarius. And I don't think we're quite in Aquarius yet, but assuming we are, we're on that cusp or that edge. I think the great paradox of Aquarius is the struggle between the collective and the all and the individual. And I think the key of it is you can only serve the collective and all when you embody your true individual self. But that's really hard to do. And I think that's what we're all being called to do. And I think today you can look at, pick up any news channel, any social media channel that is reporting what's going on in the world. And it's the great struggle of those who want to belong, and the great struggle that those want to express their unique self. And how does that, both of those things, fit in the greater context? And I think we have some people doing it beautifully, and they have great difficulty because most of the world is not doing it beautifully. And I think on one side, you've got those that are really trying to get everyone to conform, and those who are trying to really be individualistic, but might not understand what that means in a greater context. And I think you have to find your individual will and your individual essence to be able to serve a greater good. And it's a paradox. It's a holding two seemingly contrary truths to embody things. When I think of the image of Aquarius, it's the two waves. It's the surface wave and it's the lower wave. You have to have both. It's not just one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard to do. And I think magical communities can help people navigate that. And as much as we've had a boom in witchcraft and magic in the last 5, 6, 7 years, and it's become very popular in bookstores and TikTok and all that, we've had booms in the past before, and they've not been the solution to everything. Like when I came into witchcraft in the early 90s, there was a boom, and then there was a recession to it, And so I think there's a lot of excitement, and I think with that excitement, there's a lot of misinformation about things. And then I think the wave will recede, and the strong practitioners and teachers and authors and groups will stay, and those that are not will sort of be washed out. And I think, sadly, at that time, it takes the washing out to see what's sturdy, and it takes the washing out to see what's going to help the greater community. But I think that's the challenge we face, is how do we share these things with other people in the world, where most of the world doesn't care about witchcraft and paganism. Most of the world doesn't even care about spirituality, so it's about how do we share these ideas through art, through music, through medias that do not focus just on our community, to get those ideas out. And it might be us teaching other people who have greater influence, and bringing that out. But I think just sharing that essential self in the context of community starts to reverberate out. And I think you can't control, kind of like, when you say you do a spell and you do the spell for the outcome, not to control how it happens. I think we can have the intention of what we want the world to be or how we want to treat each other. but it's very hard to control each of the steps to it. Like I look at some of the horrors that have frankly happened in the world in the last 6, 7 years. Not that there always haven't been horrors in the world, but much more illuminating, at least in the United States, great difficulties. And as much as I want to stop certain things, I also have to think, is that the thing that tips this other thing that's going to make something good? I don't know. I'm not wise enough for that. I have to think that everything serves on some level. I just have to hope that everything can serve on a higher octave, that we can serve more consciously. So I try to be really conscious about all my decisions and really conscious with the ways I deal with people and the way that I interact and model that. So maybe other people will, but you can't control and you can't force. And so I think that that bridge in the pagan world to the greater social consciousness is the struggle we have. And I don't think there's an easy answer. I'd love to create something so popular that it's going to change the world, but I don't know if that's going to come from witches. Maybe it will, but I don't know that, and I can only do what my will is in the moment and let it reverberate out.
That was a great answer.
Yep.
That was a great answer. Is there anything that you would like to see happen, like an event or a program that you think would be a catalyst for just like moving towards this integration of being your whole individual self while serving the collective?
I think about that a lot, and I'm going to sound a little pessimistic with this right now. So I'm generally optimistic, and I generally, despite the difficulties of the world, I definitely hold a strong heart that things will unfold in a good way. And I would say in younger years, I thought like, oh, if we can only get witches together to, everybody do a spell with clear intent. And I think I can barely get my coven together to do a spell with clear intent. Like, how are we going to get all the witches across the world to do something? Because we're all coming from different systems and different paradigms. And could we have one event that's going to, trigger things? And I think of the big events that we've had that have triggered things, they've still not been the panacea and the cure-all for everything. I think right before I got into all of this, it was pretty close to after people had the harmonic convergence. That was in 1987. And by the time I got into New Age stuff and witchcraft, people were talking about that still. And it was sort of like we did this big thing at sacred sites, and any day now, the world's going to become a paradise, or to enter into the age of Aquarius. And, some people thought it was back to the 1960s and 1967, 1969, like the power of love is going to conquer war and everything's going to happen. Or even if you go back in the magical traditions, like the work of Dion Fortune and the rites of Isis and Pan, I think they had a huge, huge effect on our understanding of the divine feminine and feminism in general. But look where we are today. It's not like it cured everything. Or even going back to the work of Aleister Crowley and the Aeon of Horus and the Book of the Law, and we've entered into a new age. Yet that's not also been the panacea of things. So rather than think of one particular event that's a catalyst, I think of lots of smaller events that are ripples of change in the same direction. So there's some groups that do these things. I'm very blessed to be a part of a couple of them that are not even necessarily connected to the temple, although some of them are involved in the Temple of Witchcraft. But magical groups of people who I consider to be adepts doing intentional work at specific astrological alignments in fairly large groups of actual practitioners to set an intention for the changes that they would like. But it's getting people of enough of a like mind who can work together, and sometimes trying to create something larger has good intention, but can also have some dissonance to it. And I've not seen the larger things have as much of a big effect. Maybe it's like a pebble down the hill and eventually it's going to take off and there'll be an avalanche. But I've not seen that yet. So maybe that will be in my later lifetime. Maybe that won't be my lifetime. Who knows? But I'm hopeful for all good intents having a good effect. But I feel like that's not a place I can put my energy, because my guidance is in smaller, littler things. Like in our temple, we focused on what are specific changes we would like to see locally, what are specific changes we'd like to see statewide, nationally, and what's within our reach of a magical group of people. So rather than think, I want justice and equality for all, is there a specific bill that would be helpful right now that's up for election? And can we tip that towards getting passed? Or, even aspects of like, what is the recycling program in your town? And if they're going to vote on it, it looks like they're not going to get it passed. Can you do magic and also follow it up with real world action of talking to people in your town to get that passed so there can be more environmental stuff? And even if you can say, you know, how much good does recycling do? The step in that direction can bring the next step, can bring the next step, can bring the next step. But you've got to kind of get the first step that's in your reach. So I look for little things that are feasible, you know, and get a small group of people who, you know, have a clear intention to do that work and to push for little things feasibly so you can do greater things feasibly. And I do think, sorry, this is such a long answer, but I do think that a lot of the work we have to do on a statewide and a national and a global level is not so much the fights that we are framing it as for equity and justice, but it's healing work. So I think our institutions are spiritually parasited. So I think we need to do cleansings and clearings, which is hard to do when you can't, you know, bring your tools to the courthouse, you know, but I think that's the kind of remote work we can do. But we also have to be wary of self-righteousness, because a lot of Christians are doing spiritual warfare thinking they're totally righteous about casting out the witches, and witches are demons and all that. So for me, it's been helpful to frame it as healing, and healing has a place for all, and healing has a place for all sorts of different paradigms and views. But unless we take care of this, the energetic spiritual pathology, you know, we're not going to heal.
Hmm. So that is a great point. We probably can't bring our tools to the courthouse,
Right.
like the halls of justice, right? But what might that look like? What fetishes do you think would be appropriate to get a hold of if we wanted to do work like that?
So in that type of work, what I do is I try to get something from the physical space. If I can't get something from the physical space, like a rock from the garden outside, you know, something like that. If I can't get that, I try to take a physical picture of when I'm there. If I can't get that, then I try to take somebody else's picture and use that as a focus. And I'm a big believer in doing a lot of mediated vision work. So a lot of times I try to connect to a higher power that's hopefully wiser and more powerful than I am. And I'm its link to the physical world. I'm its link to the human consciousness. And often I don't do this work alone. I'll do it in a small focused group, because that group consciousness is both stronger and gives you a buffer, because when you try to do it alone, it's like you're the fulcrum point for a really big lever and it can break your body. So I think when you work with a strong, small group, it spreads that impact out. I think that's something we don't talk enough about in magical practices. And you know, then I do the visionary work of connecting to the clearing, cleansing process, entity, spirit, plant spirit, whatever it may be. I work a lot with stars. So I'll call down specific stars for their virtues and use that to flood a particular space with the idea of unattached blessing. I don't know what the final result should be, but I'm invoking a virtue in this space for a greater good. And I ask that with ease, grace, and gentleness that unfold towards the greatest good for all involved. But I use a physical focus of either a rock that I got from the place or a picture, a photo, and set up a little altar to make that happen.
Ooh, yeah, go get it. So rock, picture, physical item for sure. I think I have like a Statue of Liberty somewhere around here that I was considering using, that I got from the Statue of Liberty. What about herbs, oils, waters, metals, rocks?
Yep. So I will often put them on the altar that I'm using as my focus, and if they have the ability to then leave it someplace nearby. So like sometimes, and the most simple thing is I'll take a rock from a place, I'll work it, and then I'll bring the rock back. You know, and so it's emanating that virtue there. But it could be sometimes I take powders and I sprinkle them in the garden, or I bring them that space. A lot of the places I'm working with, I'm not physically near, so that doesn't always work too. But if I had the substance, but it's also that can be alarming to people, you know, so it's figuring out how you can do that in a subtle way. I remember hearing about a chaos magic group that made a particular empowered sigil, and it was for Reformation in the Catholic Church, and they brought it to Vatican City and they just left it in the square. You know, I was like, whoa, that's a powerful technique, and just let it stay there. And whatever happened, it emanated out there, and somebody probably cleaned it up and took it out at some point, but it was there long enough. And I remember, I can't remember what the political thing was, but soon after that, some announcement happened, some scandal was revealed, something happened that helped move things towards greater truth and justice. So they saw that as a success. And I would agree, you know, that's the type of work we would do. So, but they were clever enough to have somebody who's going to Italy that could bring it to the Vatican. So good for them.
All right now.
Yeah.
Right. Are there any types of magic that are like your favorite to perform?
Ooh, I'm a big herb guy, and as time goes on, I do more and more with the living herbs. Although I like gathering my herbs, I like making my medicines and my potions and things like that. More and more over the years, having the privilege of having a fabulous garden, being able to grow things from seed and have things come back, I will often just sit with the plant and do the magic with the plant that way. I might take a little bit, and if it's something edible, eat it as that part. And this is not to diminish the idea of mixing oils and mixing potions and such, but a lot of my work right now has been just the living plant of going out to the forest, going out to the garden, going out wherever the plant is I want to work with, and really working with an individual plant spirit.
Hmm. Well, it sounds very rewarding.
It's been really amazing. Yeah, and it's a lot of work to keep the gardens going, but it's been really rewarding. I've been trying to take my Blu-ray track this year to spend maybe an hour every morning out in the garden or out in the forest as my personal spiritual practice. And when I'm yellow ray or red ray, I tend to spend an hour in front of the altar every morning. But this year, I'm trying to change that tact at least before it gets too hot here. We'll see what happens when the heat hits, but or the mosquitoes come out. But in the morning, it's pretty cool here, so it's easier.
Nice, nice. And do you find that like the spirits that you're working with, like in these tracks, they have like regular kind of advice or medicine to offer?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think, each of the spirits in each of these 3 tracks tends to bolster the virtues of that track. So, like, the angels and archangels for the ray of will help you get in touch with more of your divine will and divine purpose. The fairies and the nature spirits help you get in talk with the kind of primal love of the land. So it's not sentimental love of the second track of the second Blu-ray. And then the ancestors really connect you to that sense of the wisdom of those who've come before. And there's certain rituals we do, but there's a lot of flexibility to create your own rituals and to see what comes out. So I think every year I'm on a ray, I come up with some new ritual or I come up with some practice, and it might just be for me, might not be for everybody. But a lot of it too is also very reciprocal offerings.
Mhm.
So whether it's offerings to the angels of usually clear water, offerings of cream and milk and butter to the fairies, offerings of food and drink to the ancestors, I feel like there's something tangible in those physical offerings that allow the virtue to pass between you, that allow the communication to strengthen. I used to be I'm always a skeptic at everything. And in fact, I talk about this repeatedly. And I had a student say to me recently, they're just like, you've been doing this for so long. When are you going to believe? I'm like, oh, I believe, but any new thing that comes out, I trust, but I verify. I need to know, because there's a lot of crazy things that are out there, and I'm just not going to take up every crazy thing and be like, yeah, that works absolutely. I think that's foolish. And so, when we're doing ancestral offerings or any type of offering, I was always of the mind of, why do they need this stuff? They're dead. Why do they need this stuff? They're fairies. Like they're not. And it really got impressed upon me. It was about building the bridge between those worlds.
Hmm.
That this was energy to build a reciprocal link. And they didn't necessarily need the cream or the water or the alcohol, but they needed the vitality that was passed with it. And when you pass them vitality, they could pass a different type of vitality or information back to you. And I was like, oh, that's a technology. I get that. Okay, that makes sense. And then I tried it out. I'm like, oh, that works. When I make the offerings, I get more contact. If I make less offerings, I get less contact. So, if I want to have that flow and that contact, I'm going to keep up with my offerings and do it in a clear and patterned way. So that's been very helpful for me. But I always question things before I embrace them.
Excellent. So that's like the process of belief for you.
Yep.
It sounds like, yeah. Do you think there's a such thing as inappropriate offerings for spirits, ancestors?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the inappropriate offering is the offering that they do not want. And I think you can make a mistake. And in the way I work with spirits, a mistake made in love and trust and ignorance usually carries very little consequence as long as you listen to the feedback and don't do it again.
Mhm.
Like, so for an example, and there's different traditions. We have a Ganesh altar in the temple, and Ganesh has been very helpful for removing obstacles as he is. And so at one point he likes sweet things and he's got traditional offerings. But I think as gods migrate into different cultures and spirits migrate into different cultures, you try out different things, and you see what they like. And if you get a good response, you keep it up. If you get a very clear no, you're like, sorry, I brought that before you, and I'll get you something else. And so Ganesh has responded really well to all sorts of sweets, all sorts of candies, fruits, anything that has that sweet scent or a sweet taste to it. And I gave him chocolate, which normally he's really great with, and I've had great experiences with giving Ganesh chocolate. I didn't realize it was a fancy chocolate that had bacon in it. And some Ganesh's histories are vegetarian, and some Ganesh's are meat eaters. So it depends on the story and the tale. But this particular Ganesh form that comes through did not like that. And immediately the vibe of the house changed and everything grew dark. And I was like, oh, what did I like? It happened right after the offering. So I was like, what did I do to offend? And then I looked at the wrapper and I was like, oh, this isn't the chocolate I usually give. It is fancy and it was more expensive, but it was weirdly had bacon in it. And so, I was like, this is not, and I took it off the altar. I said, please, sorry if I offended you. Here's another offering for you. I hope you like it. And then everything lightened. And I was like, okay, that's good. So I think you can give things that are inappropriate. But I think unless you're coming from a long-standing tradition that has rules of do and don't, a lot of it for modern witches is playing a guessing game and being sensitive to see those reactions. And generally, I feel like the spirits don't punish you for things that are made in heartfelt ignorance. So I've known people who have made offerings. I have a friend who's an Ifa priest, and his traditions, they'll talk about how, a particular offering for a particular issue needs this many coconuts and this many oranges and this many bolts of silk and this and that. And he tells a story from one of his teachers about how someone who couldn't afford all that said, well, I can't afford all that. To do a reading for the spirits, we'll just give this. I can't afford that either. Just do this. Kept on diminishing the offerings. He's like, I really have nothing to give. And they said, a glass of pure water offered with perfect intent is the best offering if you have nothing else to give. If you have things to give, then you should probably give the things in the tradition. But if you have nothing else to give, and it really struck me, the pure glass of water with perfect intent. Because really the offering is perfect intent, not just the water, particularly in those situations. So I think if you give something with perfect intent, I think it will be accepted. Even if it's not congruous with the spirit, they might say, don't give that again, but we appreciate your intent. This is what we're looking for. So it takes also the ability to listen and to feel and to divine and to do all that, but I think for the most part, the spirits really want reciprocal relationships. So I think they're not going to shut you down because you made a mistake.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I tend to agree. I work on noticing how quickly, or if anything, rots on the altar.
Yep.
If it's an outside altar, if things don't get eaten in nature, but they do get eaten, then I look at that as an omen. Things like that. In general, I wonder, culturally, if certain people shouldn't have alcohol, or if you season a food a certain way, does the salt offend, or does the spice offend, or does the corn offend, or what have you? And ways to think about that and make it consistent and helpful.
I think when in doubt, ask. When in doubt, ask and see what they say.
I hear that.
Yeah, I have another friend who. So working with land spirits in a place of indigenous backgrounds in this area, it's the Abenaki tribes, and you traditionally would not offer alcohol. Yet I feel like a lot of our fairy conclaves is sort of a mixture of those fairies that came with us, from those of us of European descent, and those who are indigenous fairies and indigenous land spirits to it that might not have the alcohol to it, or that might not be respectful. So I always ask when I'm in a new space. There's certain spaces in the temple where for the land spirits, alcohol is acceptable. And there's other spaces when it's not acceptable. So I just have figured out those spaces and what those interface points and the spirits that come to them want or don't want. Inside my house, inside the temple space, alcohol is much more accepted. And outside in the physical natural spaces, it's much less accepted. So it's just figuring out the rules for the spirits that you're with.
Love it. That process. Is there a vision forming for you for the future? Is there a call to action that you would like to vocalize for the pagan community or the magical community or anyone who might be watching?
I think my biggest call to action is to embody your will. I think we sometimes get into some difficulties when we try to dictate what others' wills should be in the world. I think you can put a call out to say, hey, I'd like to do this thing. Who wants to help me? But I think sometimes when we make the larger generalized calls for stuff, in my experience, it's not always gone well. So I feel like my job as an educator of a mystery school is to catalyze people to find their own function And then if enough people of a similar function can gather together, groups can form that bring that together. But when I try to micromanage that process, it does not go well for me.
Hmm. So growing from like an organelle to a whole organ system based on people recognizing what their function is and
Yeah.
finding a niche.
Yep, exactly. And I think it's a process. I think people often start with really great ideas, but I think, at least from a magical perspective, if you don't work through your stuff, and that's what a mystery school or an initiatory program or an educational program hopefully helps you do. I think if you don't work through that stuff, you bring, even under the best of circumstances, you bring blind spots with you. But if you don't do any of the work, you bring huge blind spots with you. And I think that's why a lot of things collapse, because people have a lot of tangle in their psyche and their consciousness, and they bring it to their calls to action, and they bring it to their social justice, and they bring it to their community groups. And there's just not that clarity of purpose. So I think bring yourself and others through a clarifying, catalyzing, and initiatory process, and through the discovery of what your will is. If you're in community, you can find others who have that work. Like, some people in the temple go through their experiences. And I wouldn't say they leave the temple in the sense that they don't want to come back, but they find their work is someplace else. And maybe what we're doing is not conducive to support that, because it's their catalyzing property has something outside of the world of metaphysics, and they need a different type of support system. But they might come back and teach about it, or they might come back and talk about it, or and then others might find it within our community, and they form committees, and they form groups, and they form ministries that might tackle those things. But I think you've got to have a certain like-mindedness, and you have a certain level of similar shared purpose and similar ideas of how to go about it, because two people can have a similar end goal but have really strong ideas of how to get there that could be really divergent, and you could spend all your time kind of fighting about whose ideas are more valid or how to synthesize them. Sometimes when you synthesize radically different ideas, what's the idea that a camel is a horse drawn by committee? I think sometimes that happens. Not that camels are not beloved, but if you're shooting for a horse, you kind of miss the mark there. And I think sometimes people, when they come together with two divergent ideas, they could have had two successful projects, but when they brought it together, they had one unsuccessful project.
Mm-hmm. Heard on that. Then my last question for you is a question I've been getting from a bunch of people over like the past couple of weeks. So here in the community, Buffalo, New York, where I'm at, we do have a beautiful, thriving community, and we do offer some public and private events. But the thing that I've been getting over maybe like the past 2 weeks is imposter syndrome in magic and how to overcome that.
Mm.
Do you have any advice for that?
That's a great one. And this is something that's talked about more in recent years. And I would say probably when I was training, that phrase wasn't around in quite the same way. And I think my experience of it has been people who are afraid of suffering from imposter syndrome, which is the whole definition of it, is usually are not. And the people who are truly imposters have no concept that they are. So I think if you're worried about it, you can almost take that as a level of self-awareness to be able to move through it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the people I really worry about never ask themselves those questions. And so it's sort of taking heart from that. But I think the only way through any type of lack of confidence, I guess, is where a lot of this is coming, is from the practice, is from the doing. I think we sometimes suffer from, in modern magic and through hearing a lot of people's experiences, particularly through social media and such, that we expect it's supposed to be easy, and we expect it's supposed to be quick, and we expect what I want when I want right now in terms of spiritual experiences. And that's never been my actual experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always been hard work, and it's always been a lot of practice, and it's been a lot of failed starts, and it's been a lot of frustration. I use a lot of metaphors or a lot of examples for people teaching that are about using, like, studying an art. And I think anybody who's studied a classical art in any way, shape, or form has some advantages in the magical process. And I know people are doing that less and less now. But if you've studied a musical instrument, if you've studied dance, if you've studied any type of visual art, if you've studied any type of auditory art, if you've honed a craft, if you've learned woodworking, whatever it may be, there's principles behind it, and then there's creativity to it. And I think magic's the same way. But when you're learning the principles, as much as you might love a discipline, it can be frustrating at times. And if you think it's always going to come out perfect, that's not really an art. And I think magic is many things, and one of them is an art and science. So I think telling people, using those examples of it, I was talking to a student recently and she was a little upset with some of the feedback. And she's like, well, why do you always ask me about past lessons? And I'm like, well, we're looking for integration, you know, and I said she was a pianist. So I said, well, imagine you were holding your hands in a particular way when you were playing piano and the teacher corrected you and you got it great for a lesson. And you came back the next month and you were holding them the bad way again. You know, I'm going to say, hey, don't you remember last lesson? You know, and she's like, oh, that's what we're doing. I didn't get that. You know, so it was really interesting to kind of get the idea that there's an art to it, and learning to take feedback and learning to struggle. Like when people say, oh, I can't meditate, I'll be like, well, what'd you do? And they meditated and they didn't see fantastic visions the first time out. And I said, well, I stared in front of a candle for 6 months before I started seeing things. Like, oh, that takes a lot. That's a lot of hard work, and I don't want to wait that long. I'm like, well, that's the practice. To learn how to play piano, I practiced scales for years. I still practice scales. So, you know, to learn drawing, I practice perspective and paint mixing and, you know, technique. So if you want to learn these things, it takes time and effort to hone the skills. And if you don't, that's okay. But, you know, don't beat yourself up.
Yes, I love it. I love it. I think of imposter syndrome as a bias, in which case someone is not really good at evaluating their strengths and their skills.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's not always a great way to see yourself. And I think sometimes there can be a lack of confidence, but I think that's normal. You know, I think when we put a name to it, maybe that's helpful. Sometimes it's not, you know, but I think the true imposters never ask themselves that question.
Mm-mm. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I do not have any more questions. I'm so grateful that you have come and participated in this telethon with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm wishing everyone great success to get to the Parliament. I don't think I'll be there this year, but I hope you all have an amazing time.
Yes, thank you so, so much. For everyone else, keep watching. There's going to be a lot of great content for this telethon. And until next time, this is Reverend Phoenix Coffin Williams with Mr. Christopher Penczak. All of y'all blessed be, okay?
Blessed be everyone.
Good morning, good evening, good night. Thank you so much, wherever you are, for giving me a little bit of time. I am Sir Pamela Kelly, and I am part of the Sacred Order of Paladins, and we are trying to get to Parliament. This is all about the Road to Parliament 2023 Correlians Live Telethon, 50 hours of magic and community. It starts this Friday, May 5th at 5 p.m. Eastern and goes through Sunday, May 7th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And it's all to get the Paladins on the road to Parliament, the Parliament of the World's Religions, coming to Chicago this August 2023. We want to be there. We want to represent the pagan community, and we want to help others that are there. But we need your help first. So how do we do this? We're having a telethon, like I said. And the way you can help us out is, well, let me show you. Come to this website, https. Well, I don't need to tell you that part. I need to tell you the good part. givebutter.com/C/Correlians Live. So givebutter.com/C for campaign/Correlians Live. And when you click on it, that's where you get right here, this page. It's a wonderful page because it not only tells you why we're here, but it gives you more information, and it shows you where you can watch Correlians Live Telethon. Shows you all the different places, and also gives you our contact information. The reason you want to keep this page, givebutter.com/C/Correlians Live, is not only does it give you that information, this is how you donate. You can donate now if you'd like to. You see, we've got $70 already, 1% to our $10,000 goal. We definitely need your help. You can donate now, click on the donate and choose an amount. And so I'm just going to give you an example of $10. Now you can credit a team member. We don't get the money, but we just get credit for you donating to us. There I am, but there's all these hardworking paladins here. Or if you don't want to play favorites, I understand. Just go ahead and click none and continue. Then this is where you put your message if you'd like to. From grandma or grandpa. Write your message, upload an image, make a drawing, send us a GIF or a GIF. I don't care what you call it. We would just appreciate your donation. Once you're there with that, you go to the next button and it'll give you the credit card processing fee. Now it automatically adds a tip for Give Butter. We'd appreciate you if you gave that tip to Give Butter, because it's a really good platform. But you don't have to. You can go ahead and do other and zero out. But again, we'd like it because Give Butter has been a good platform for us. Right here, we'd love it if we can stay in contact with you. Allow the Correlian Nativist Church to contact me. This is if you want to remain anonymous. You can do hide my name or amount from public view. And then select your payment information. Once you click on that, it's going to show you how much you need, and then it's going to send you to where you put all your information in. So we know how to do that. But that's how you donate. You can do that right now. But what people really want, I know why you're here. You're here for the auction. So right here, overview, right here, auction. We click on the auction. You can already see items that have been loaded. You can already get an idea of things that you want, like a 15-minute tarot reading with First Priest, Most Reverend Phoenix Coffin Williams. Who wouldn't want that? I want that. Well, you can't bid on these yet. You have to wait till the bidding opens when we start the telethon on May 5th at 5 p.m. Eastern. But you can add it to the calendar. You can add it to a calendar so you know when you can come back and start bidding on items like, look at that, the chainmail pentacle wall hanging, all sorts of jewelry, books. I really love this. I'm probably, you and I are probably going to be in a bidding war for one of these. So join me back later. But right now you can register to bid. That's what this whole video here is about. You can register to bid, so you'll be ready to go first thing as soon as we open the bidding on Friday. So click on register to bid. It's going to bring you to the page where, you know, the information, what it's going to ask you, your first and last name. This can be your magical name. This can be whatever you want it to be. This is the it's not as important what is here, but once you do have to put a phone number in. Found that out because I tried to zero it out. But once you get that set up, it's going to ask you to verify your email, and then you continue setting up your profile. Now, this is where you put your information in for your credit card and your payment method. So you're going to have to use, this is where you're going to have to use the name that's on your credit card. And again, this goes to Give Butter. This isn't going to go to me. You put your information there, fill it out. And once you save and continue here, you're set. You have an account and you can come back here and start bidding. It is that easy. Ah, man, look at all this stuff. And there's going to be even more. I'm looking forward to it. 50 hours of magic, community, music, guests, Christopher Penczak, Selena Fox, Byron Ballard. I don't want to tell you all the guests. It's a surprise. The Red Album. Have you heard about the Red Album? Don't worry, you're going to hear about the Red Album. So be back to join us for 50 hours of magic and community starting this Friday, May 5th. And thank you for supporting us on our road to the Parliament. We're really looking forward to this weekend. So see you then. Have a wonderful time. Have a wonderful night, morning, whatever it is, wherever you're at. Thank you so much for joining me.